Okay, so let's just get started on our last unit of the course. It's a quick little unit just applying a few things we learned in the past couple units, and it's just going to be on an interest. So if you're not familiar with how interest works, if you have some sort of bank account, or if you take out a loan, generally you make some kind of investment, and if you're investing something with a bank or a mutual fund or a bond, they pay you back a certain percentage of what you invested in the form of interest. Similarly, if you take a loan either through a credit card or again through a bank, they charge you a certain percentage of what you borrowed, again, called interest. So we're going to look at a couple types of interest in this unit. The first we're going to look at is going to be called simple interest. And we call it simple because in this case interest is calculated only on the initial amount you invest. The initial amount you invest is called the principal. The interest is only calculated based on that. So any interest that you've earned or you had to pay does not earn any additional interest. It's only based on what you initially invest. We're going to look at that kind of interest later on, which is a bit more complicated. But this one, again, it's only calculated based on the initial amount, which is called the principal. Okay, so in our formula for that, it's relatively straightforward. It's I equals PRT, and what do those mean? Well, I stands for the amount of interest that you've either earned or that you have to pay if it's a loan. P is your principal, which is your initial amount invested or borrowed. R is your annual interest rate, okay, and then last but not least, T is of course time. Okay, so whatever information you know, you can use the formula and solve for whatever's missing. Okay, so let's take a quick look here. Let's just use it right away. So let's just say we invest $1,000 at 4% per year for 5 years. Okay, now a couple things I will note here. You're generally, this is going to be simple interest. That's the first thing you're looking for. You know you can use the equation I equals P times R times T, principal times rate times time. And it's just a matter of figuring out what you have and what you're solving for. So it wants us to calculate the interest, so we know we're going to be solving for I. We're told the principal, the original investment, is $1,000. We're told it's going to be over a period of 5 years. Okay, and then the only thing you have to watch out for our interest rate, remember that R is the annual interest rate, but it's as a percentage. We need to convert it to a decimal, so that's going to be 0.04. So to have all that information, you just sub it into the equation. So you have a principal of 1,000, a rate of 0.04, and a time of 5 years. Okay. Another thing I'll note here in dealing with the time has to be in years because the interest rate is of course in per year. It's annual, so the time has to be in years as well. So we have 1,000 times 0.04 times 5, which you can quickly run through your calculator, and it should tell you that's going to be equal to about $200. Okay, so that means at the end of the 5 years, you on top of $1,000 you already invested, you gain an extra $200 in interest. Okay, so with that in mind, I'd like you to try the next couple on your own. Try B and C. So in B, you're borrowing. It doesn't change the calculation just because it's a borrow or a loan that you've taken out instead of an investment. Just the only difference is you have to pay the interest instead of you getting the interest back. So in this case, you're borrowing $2,500 at 3.75% per year for 3 years and 5 months. In the third case, you're investing $750 at 5.5% a year for 150 days. And the one thing I want to note here, remember every time you're dealing with time, because the interest rate is annual, you have to be having your time in years. Okay, so if you're not in years, you have to make sure you convert accordingly. So I'll let you give those a try first, and when you have answers, push play and we'll go through them together. Okay, so let's quickly check our answers here. So for B, we're told the initial amount borrowed is $2,500. That's our principal, our P. Our interest rate is 3.75% per year. As a decimal, you divide by 100, that's 0.0375. And the trickiest part with this one is converting the 3 years and 5 months into just years. So what I did over here, I just kept track. So 3 years is, of course, 3 years. And 5 months, if you convert to years, is 5 over 12. Because, again, there's 12 months in a year. So you're combining the 3 years and the 5 over 12 years together. You add those. Once you find a common denominator, you wind up with 41 over 12 years. So that is what goes into the equation for T. Okay, so principal times rate times time gives you a interest earned, interest that you have to pay of $321.31. Okay, in the case of C, it's very, very similar. We're given our principal of $750. It's an investment this time. Our annual interest rate is 5.5%, which we convert to a decimal to get 0.055. And for 150 days, if we work with 365 days in a year, it'll be 150 over 365 years. So don't round that, put into the equation as a fraction so you don't lose any accuracy. When you multiply everything together, you get interest earned of $16.95. Okay, so that in general is how simple interest works. Okay, let's take a look at a couple other types of problems you might run into. So in this case, we're borrowing $1,900 at 7.25% or 7.25%. Let's just do that right now, just to make our life a little bit easier. 7.25%. And it's simple interest. How much will you owe at the end of 37 weeks? Okay, so to work through this one, again, we're given what we originally borrowed, so that's going to be our principal. Okay, we have our annual interest rate, and we have our time, but it's in weeks, so what we need to do is convert that into years. Okay, so knowing that there's 52 weeks in a year, this will be 37 over 52 years. Okay, and with that in mind, we have everything we need to figure out how much interest we've had to pay on top of what we borrowed. So our interest is going to be, again, our principal times our rate times our time. Okay, our principal is going to be $1,900. Our rate as a decimal is going to be 0.0725. Do not forget to convert that percentage to a decimal. And our time is going to be 37 over 52. Okay, so we can run all that through our calculator, and we will get, okay, to 2 decimal places, $98.01. Okay, now you gotta be careful here, because this isn't what you owe. This is the interest that you have to pay back on top of what you already borrowed. So how much do you have to owe at the end of 37 weeks? Well, it's the interest plus the initial amount you borrowed. You don't get to ignore that $1,900 that was really borrowed. So the total amount you have to pay back is going to be equal to your principal plus your interest. So we borrowed $1,900, so we have to pay that back, as well as a $98.01 of interest. So putting all that together, we have to pay back in total $1,998.01. Okay, what this is referred to as is the future amount of the loan or the investment. So in this case, you borrowed $1,900. Its future amount, how much you're going to have to owe at the end of 37 weeks, is going to be your principal plus the interest that you've earned, or that interest that you've had to pay extra in those 37 weeks. Okay, so let's move on. So now let's take a look at an investment of $4,000 that you're going to invest at 3% per year simple interest. I want us to just take a look at what's happening to our investment over the first 5 years. So when no time has passed, we know we're starting with $4,000. So we have a point right here. Okay, but I want you to take a second and calculate, again, given that we know the principal, we know the rate, calculate the value of the investment after 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 years. I want you to sort of see what kind of pattern you notice in the table of values here. So let's do the first one together. So in the case if the time is 1, okay, the interest is going to be principal times rate times time. So again, our principal is 4,000. Our rate is 0.03. And our time, if we're doing the case where it's been 1 year, is equal to 1. Okay, so you run all that through our calculator and we wind up with $120. Okay, now the value of the investment is not $120, it's the $120 plus what you originally invested, so now we have a total investment of $4,120. Okay, so I want you to repeat this process for 2, 3, 4, and 5 years and see what kind of pattern we notice in the balances at the end of each year. Okay, when you finish that, push play and we'll talk about it. Okay, so you should notice a bit of a pattern here. You'll notice here when you get these in final investment values, what's happening, well, if you take a look at the first differences, these first differences are all going to be the same. If you go 4,240 minus 4,120, you'll notice we're going up by $120. And that's going to be a consistent thing that we're going to see as we move up the table in values, as we move down the table of values. So one thing to remember from grade 9 is if you look at tables of values, if the first differences are constant, that means it's a linear relationship. So what you have with simple interest is a linear relationship between the time and the interest earned or the total value of the investment, which kind of makes sense, right? Because if you look at the interest earned, principal times rate times time, well, the principal is constant, the rate is constant, the only thing that's changing is the time. So basically you have some constant times time, and you can add that to the initial value of an investment, which will again give you a starting value, in this case of $4,000. But since you only have one variable changing here, and it's of degree 1, this is going to be a linear relationship. So anytime you see simple interest and you expect the relationship from year to year to be linear. Okay, so let's take a look at one last example. Okay, so in this particular example, you're investing $10,000 at 3.25% per year simple interest. And after a certain amount of time that we don't know, it's now worth $12,275, and we want to figure out how much time has passed. So I'd like you to take some time, think about this one on your own, and once you think you have an answer, push play, we'll talk about it, and then that'll be it for this lesson. Okay, so when all is said and done, you should have got an answer of 7 years. Now, where did this come from? Well, first of all, let's see what we're given. So we know our initial investment was $10,000. We know right away that that's going to be our principal, our P. We know our annual interest rate, so once we convert it to a decimal by dividing by 100, we know that's going to be R. The time is what we're looking for, so T's are unknown. What we don't know explicitly right now is how much interest was earned. But the interest earned is going to be how much the investment grew by when it went from our principal to our final amount. So our investment started off at $10,000. After a certain amount of time, it's now worth $12,275. That difference is going to be the amount of interest earned. So we subtract $10,000 from the $12,275, which tells us that in whatever amount of time we had, we've earned $2,275 in interest. So once we have that, we can put that in the equation for I, and then since we know P and R already, we can solve for T. So all that's left here is just some quick little algebra. So I multiply 10,000 by 0.0325, I get 325, and then just to quickly finish off, I divide both sides of the equation by 325 to isolate for T. Okay, once that's done, I wind up with T being equal to 7 years, and that's it, that's all. Okay, so hopefully you didn't find this too bad. The next kind of thing we're going to look at is going to be compound interest, which is the way most bank accounts and other types of investments tend to work. But simple interest gives us a good foundation for what's to come. So give this homework a try, and we'll see you in the next lesson.